Hi, it's Prita Fletcher coming to you from my backyard. I'm from Ponderosa FFA Floral. This is the third video that I am making regarding bouquets, handheld bouquets, hand-tied bouquets for a bride, or that you can eventually put into a vase. And so I'm not going to do all the background that I did on my previous videos about flower prep. I have my flowers ready to go. I have about 20 stems of flowers here. I have a vase for when I'm ready for that. I have something to bind with. You'll either need bind wire of some type or a twist tie if you're working at home, maybe raffia, which is like this straw ribbon, or some kind of tape to eventually tie your bouquet together. You'll need a pair of pruners. And then in my case, the technique I'm going to use is I use a flag. And of course you don't have to have a flag, but some target might help you as you're doing this, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to show you how to make a hand-tied bouquet that is spiraled in the stems. And this is actually something that I just learned about 1.5 years ago from a florist, and I had never done it before, but now I love this technique. So if you're one of my former students, I probably didn't teach you how to do it this way, and so it'd be a good technique for you to try. This is an advanced skill, and my purpose in making this video today is really so that my students who are at home during social isolation or social distancing can continue to improve their floral skills and have an idea of something to try. This is a little more challenging, and so maybe not. For some people, you know, one floral skill is difficult for one person, it's easy for another. For me, this was a more difficult skill, and it continues to be so. If you don't have flowers like this to work with today, you can really use any plant material, and there's a test at the end that we can all do. And so if you like to know at the end of a project, did I do it right or wrong, there is a definite way to test this one. So it's really about technique. If you don't have these kind of flowers or any flowers, you can really be using any kind of plant material, and it's all about the technique of how you're putting it together. So let's get started. I'm going to start with a noticeable flower, something that I'll remember. So I really like this wide open orange rose, and I'm going to put that straight up and down. And then as I start to put material in, I'm going to keep everything in my hand here clean, because that would be what the bride would be holding on to, or it will be what eventually ends up in our vase. And so I'm going to keep that in mind. This first flower is straight up and down, but then the way that we spiral is everything we put in after that is put in at the same angle. And so that's why I say I use a flag, because that was difficult for me to grasp until a florist taught me to do it this way. And so what she said is, whenever you're going to put something in, you pretend that you're saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and then you put it in at that angle. Jack, you might have to come up so you can see what I'm doing here. Come on this side, please. There you go. Okay, so here's my first flower straight up and down. Here's my second piece. I'm going to pledge allegiance, and I'm going to put it in at that angle, just like I would put my hand over my heart. And there's my angle. I'm going to go ahead and put in a few pieces of material at that same angle. And then here's the tricky thing. Once I put in a few at that angle, I need to turn the whole thing. And then I need to put in the next piece of material. And so I also have to be thinking about, what am I placing where? What am I doing with my colors? I want this to be a random bouquet, and so I want to put in varied materials as I go along. So I pledge allegiance, and I put it in at that angle. Be sure you're keeping everything where your hand is clean, right? I pledge allegiance, I put it in at that same angle. Pledge allegiance, put it in at that same angle. And then I'm going to turn it again. So I'm turning it like a quarter turn each time I turn it. Pledge allegiance, put it in at that angle. So it's quite a lot to think about, and maybe that's why it's tougher for me. And again, of course, if we were doing this 8 hours a day, or if this was what we did for a full-time job, I'm sure we would become much better at it, faster at it. But when you're learning, I felt like this was a good technique to get us into the groove of this particular bouquet. So I'm always, whenever I get lost, like I just put in 2 items that way, and so I'm not sure, should I turn now, should I not? I don't know, I get lost. So I go back to Pledge Allegiance with my flowers, and then I turn, and I have to look at the top every once in a while to see what's going on. So like right now I have orange, yellow, purple, red, a lighter purple, and kind of a burgundy. I have this pink I need to work in, but I don't really want to put those 2 pinks together. See how that just becomes muddled? So I'm going to go ahead and put maybe some more of my greenery in here. And maybe a little more of my filler. Use the filler to break up the colors. There we go. And then I can come in with that pink, and I'm still keeping that same angle. But I have a little separation there between my pinks now. All right, I'm going to turn it again. I kind of get into a pattern of trying to maybe put in 3 materials at a time, 3 pieces, and then turning. All right, I gotta look at it again. What do I need to do? I have yellow here. I have no repetition of yellow. And so it'd be good if I balanced my yellow on this side. So here's some yellow Alstroemeria. I remember my angle, and there I have that balance. I turn again, and I'm also trying to come up with somewhat of a round shape. I can move flowers at the end, but I need to at least keep my balance of materials on each side. So because I have this great big orange rose here, it's looking a little heavy on this side. So I'll put something lighter in here, and then maybe I'll turn a couple times. And I feel like I have a hole right there, so I need to put something in that hole. I get it, the same angle when you put it in, always the same angle. I'll go ahead and put in my last orange rose. Here's my orange rose on this side. I'm going to balance it on this side. See how we're getting that spiral down here on the bottom? That's what we want. We're going to need that for our little test at the end. And I have to pay attention to what do I have left on my table, because we have to think about what we're putting into a bouquet. There is a price point here. If you're working in the industry, you can't just use all the flowers that you want all the time. My students wish they could. And then I limit them and say, no, you get 2 stems of such and such and 2 stems of this flower. So looking over the top, I have a hole here and I have a hole right there. So this is where it gets tricky. When we're at the end, I have 4 stems left, and I need to try to balance this whole bouquet and have that repetition of color, repetition of shape, of type of flower, so that the eye continues to move in that rhythm. I want some depth. I don't really want everything to be at the same height, but I can adjust that in a minute. But I need to look at it now. Now I have very few materials, so I have to make big decisions. And so this is where we get tempted to just put things straight in. And that's going to mess up your spiral that you're trying to create. So you have to continue. Like if I want a flower over here, I actually need to turn it. Remember, pledge allegiance with your flowers. And put it in that way so I continue that angle. And I think I need a flower on this side. So I'm going to turn it until I can make that possible with the right angle. If this isn't working out for you the first time, know that I think it doesn't for most people. I think this is a skill you need to practice. And it's one that you will get better at, but you might have to try it several times. Okay, so I have all my plant material in there, all my flowers at least. And I need to now look at it with a more critical eye. For example, this is a beautiful pink rose, and the rose is one of our more expensive and special flowers in this bouquet, so I don't want it tucked down into the middle. If your hand starts to bother you, you know, florists talk about carpal tunnel syndrome, they talk about arthritis. There's a lot of repetitive work, and sometimes we'll be making a bouquet. This bouquet has about 25 stems in it, I think I told you. But sometimes we're making a bouquet that has 40, 50, 60 stems in it, and your hand is going to get very sore. And so you almost have to be conscious of that, of telling your body to relax. And of course, there are other florists online that I have watched their videos, and they have many different ways of putting together a spiral bouquet. There's one fantastic florist who is Russian, and I can't understand anything she says, but she makes beautiful bouquets, and she actually lays the bouquet in her hand somehow and builds the whole thing flat and turns out with this perfect spiral at the end. But you have to remember to relax your hand so that you're not causing those problems for yourself physically as you're designing, especially if you decide this is going to be your career, or this is something you want to practice a lot. You love this. This is your outlet. This is your art form. You have to be aware of taking care of yourself so that you can do it for many, many years. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and collar with my greens. I'm going to go all the way around with the greens that I have left. I'm pulling off these lateral branches, so I'm keeping my stems clean here in my hand where I'm going to bind it all together. And because I'm just doing one after the other, I'm basically overlapping them, and I'm still putting them in at that same angle, and then I'm turning. So at this point, this just becomes very repetitive. That one broke. As we're finishing this off. And then we will do the test. And I'm not positive I'm going to pass the test. That's what makes this exciting. We'll see. The good thing about this design for our students is that it really is a test of technique. And you have to get past that point of wanting everything to look beautiful in the design, because we're limited in our materials while we're working at our homes. And can you do the technique right? So if you'll look at the stems right now, you'll see we have that spiral going on. And I want to bind it in this spiral. So I'm going to use raffia. This is my point of attachment right here, where I'm going to bind it all together, and you don't want to let go. This is a very important step. So I'm just holding on to the raffia. I'm going to go around the whole bouquet, all the stems. I'm pulling fairly tight as this material will allow me to. And then I'm going to tie it in a knot. This is where you could use bind wire, or you could use tape if you wanted to. My raffia is getting a little thin here. I hope it's going to hold. But you want this, when the bride picks it up, for it to be stable. You don't want it to start to fall apart or lose its shape. And so that binding is important. At this point, I think I have to bind it a little tighter. I don't think that's gonna hold. It's all right. Sometimes things don't work the first time. And I don't want it to come apart. Then I will for sure fail my test. Don't worry about hurting your stems at this point. We're not using very soft or hollow stems. Can you hand me that, please? I'm going to try my bind wire instead, see if I have more luck with that. If you have fragile stems, you can always keep them towards the inside of your bouquet. We're not using anything very fragile. The flowers we're using are very hardy and long-lasting on purpose. All right, so I feel like that is bound much better. And we can cut those off. All right, so here is the test. If this were for a bride, of course well, now it's actually become very fashionable to have these very long stems, but traditionally we would cut this And we're just going to cut it straight across, as straight as we can. Try to make it a nice clean cut. And then the test is, will your spiral stand up? And if it will, then you have passed this technique test. Because the idea is, if it will stand up, that means you made a balanced bouquet on the top. So I think we passed today. So if you are an aspiring florist, you just want to learn this technique. Sometimes I cut the middle ones a little bit shorter so they're not resting in the middle. If you're an aspiring florist, or you're one of my students, or you just want to get better, this is what you're aiming for with the spiral bouquet. Is it balanced when you're finished? That's your goal. At this point though, we'd like this to last a few days. So we're gonna go ahead and cut this, and we're gonna cut it 1.5 times. Over here again. 1.5 times the height of the container. And so the way that I do that is I bring the container to the edge of my table, and I hold my bouquet, the top of my bouquet there, and I mark that with my finger here at the table. And then if I bring my fingers halfway up the jar, then this is 1.5 times the height of this container. And in floral design, 1.5 to 2 times the height of the container, or 1.5 to 2 times the width of the container, will make your design be in proportion. And so I'm going to cut right here. So I'm going to mark that. And we always talk about the fact that cutting your stems is like cutting your hair. You can always go back and cut it shorter, but you can't make it longer again. So start conservatively. We want the stems to touch the bottom of the vase, which they are. We don't want it to be floating up here. We want that to be at the bottom, and we want it to be pretty stable when we put it in there. I don't really like the fact that there's a gap right there between my greens and the lip of the container. So I'm going to cut about 1/2 inch more off. There. Now my stems are at the bottom. This is more stable. It's going to last through delivery, and we have a nice bouquet. Thank you for joining me, and good luck with your flowers.